Pastor Mike here of Christ Church, Goderland. Today in this Bible talk, I want to focus on how I know I can rely on the Bible. This is really a question of bibliographical evidence or manuscript evidence. Typically, this subject falls under apologetics, which is the defense of the faith. Now, we've already discussed this a little bit in the formation of the canon, but how do we know what we have today, some 2,000 years or so after the Bible was written, how do we know what we have today is accurate? Well, to look at the Old Testament first. Now, the Old Testament is based on what's called the Masoretic text. The Masoretes, or the masters of the tradition, were Hebrew scholars in the 5th century till the 10th century AD. And these are the ones who put the various vowel markings into Hebrew to aid in pronunciation because Hebrew doesn't have any vowels. They meticulously copied one letter at a time by hand. And if they made a mistake, they would go and take the entire thing that they were doing and toss it out and start over again. Unfortunately, once they finished translating the Bible, then they tended to dispose of the old copies, and so we don't have them available anymore. Consequently, the oldest Masoretic text dates from the 9th century AD. The oldest complete text is the Leningrad Codex from the 11th century. And so people have said, okay, well, we don't have a lot of reliable manuscript evidence to look at, so therefore we can't trust the Old Testament. But in 1948, and I'm sure you've heard of this, in a cave near the Dead Sea, Akasha scrolls were found left by the Essene community at Qumran. These are, of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls. They contain many of the Old Testament books, and then comparisons have been made between the scrolls from the Qumran community, which was in the 1st century, the same time as the time of Christ, and then they looked and compared those to the manuscript scrolls that were available from the Masoretes. What they have found is that the transmission of the text through the Masoretes was very, very accurate. Now, as for the New Testament, of course, the New Testament was written much more quickly than the Old Testament, and so the transmission of the New Testament also happened very, very differently. New Testament manuscript evidence is of a whole different order. In fact, apologist Josh McDowell, he lists many ancient writers such as Caesar and Tacitus and Plato and so forth. Now, we know when these guys lived, and we know the time difference between when they lived and the oldest manuscripts that we have of theirs. Typically, what you find with ancient manuscripts is around 1,000-year time difference, really, with maybe only a handful of manuscripts available. There are 10 manuscripts for the writings of Caesar, 7 for the writings of Plato, and maybe 20 for Tacitus. And this pretty much holds true for most of ancient literature. For Pliny, Thucydides, Suetonius, Herodotus, Sophocles, Demosthenes, Aristotle. In fact, Homer's Iliad, which many of us read in high school, rests on 643 manuscripts from about 500 years after his death. So this is considered highly reliable manuscript evidence. The New Testament, by comparison, has over 5,300 manuscripts of the Greek New Testament, 10,000 of the Latin Vulgate, and 9,300 other early manuscripts with over 24,000 copies of portions of the New Testament available to us today. The oldest of these date within 25 years of the 1st century. In fact, recently a copy of the Gospel of Mark was found located on the inside of an Egyptian funerary mask, which dates to the 1st century. No other ancient manuscript evidence even comes close to what the Bible has to offer for it, especially the New Testament. John Warwick Montgomery has said, to be skeptical of the resultant text of the New Testament books is to allow for all of classical antiquity to slip into obscurity, for no documents of the ancient period are as well attested bibliographically as the New Testament. You can rely on the Bible's accuracy. Until next time, happy reading.